Today's question has to do with the moral argument for God. And the question is simply, if objective morality exists, if there is a true right and wrong, moral absolutes if you want to put it that way, then how does that indicate that God actually exists? That's the core question.
Well, that's a very good question. Let's find out. Converted man here. Do moral absolutes prove that God exists? No, they don't. Next video. Alright. Needs to do a little bit more than that. So, there's a number of issues with this. First and foremost, how would you know that there is a moral absolute? Just how would you know that? Without claiming special knowledge, how would you know that there is a moral absolute, whatever that moral might be? And without ethics, how would you have morals at all? So wouldn't you have ethical absolutes? But ethics requires the ability to ask questions. So if there's an absolute, then ethics is destroyed and thus morals don't exist at all. You just have a way to do things and that's it. You have no choice in the matter. This is the way you do things. Period. There's going to be a lot of issues in this, and in order to cover them all, I'm going to speed up portions of his video so that I can get to the points that he makes and make my points about those points. Here we go.
But let me give you a quick sketch. First thing that I need to clarify is what I mean by objective morality. This is really critical because people get this confused all the time. When we say that morality is objective, we mean that moral qualities are characteristics of the behaviors themselves. So if rape is wrong, it's because there's something about rape that's wrong, the object, if you will. In this case, the object is an action. And it's not something about the one who's perceiving the object or the subject. Rape isn't wrong because I believe it's wrong. It's not wrong because my culture says it's wrong. It's not wrong because my genes have tricked me into believing it's wrong because of evolution. If rape is objectively wrong, then it is wrong in itself, irrespective of anything anybody else thinks. The whole world could think it's right for whatever reason, yet if rape is objectively wrong, it would still be wrong, regardless of what people think.
It's very important for us to remain objective in the analysis portion of the critical analysis that I'm performing, and hopefully you are also performing as well, and to set aside whatever emotions we might have about different subjects. I don't like that he uses rape as an example, and this is all too common with theistic apologetics, that they'll use something really horrendous as an example. But nonetheless, let's use that as the example, fine. X is wrong, whatever X might be. If X is wrong, X is wrong. That's the way things are. That's the nature of reality. I want you to pay very, very, very close attention to what he just said, though. It's so important, I'm going to play it again.
The whole world could think it's right for whatever reason, yet if rape is objectively wrong, it would still be wrong, regardless of what people think.
So, we need to recognize this as a tautology. X, whatever X might be, is wrong, bad, evil, etc. Even if no one knows that, no one in the entire world knows it, is still a fact. No one knows that it's a fact, but it's a fact. Of course, not knowing it's a fact doesn't help us, but nonetheless, it's still a fact. Like gravity, or the speed of light, or something like that. It's a fact of the universe. So even if humans cease to exist, it still is wrong. Now, does that mean that it's wrong for animals, and plants, and insects, and viruses, and bacteria? Or does it only apply to humans? Well, if it's wrong, then it would have to apply to everything that it could apply to. So, even rocks. But rocks can't rape anything. It doesn't matter. It's wrong. If a rock can do it, it's wrong. If anything does it, whatever it is, in this case it's rape, it's wrong. Period. Even if no life exists in the entire universe, somehow it's still wrong. In other words, it's the nature of reality for it to be wrong. So, if it's the nature of reality for this to be wrong, then reality is that way. What we need to do is formulate an argument to demonstrate that reality is in fact that way. But you'll notice something is missing from this equation. God. God is not necessary to posit for this equation to work. Reality exists. We're going to accept that. I don't know why we wouldn't. And we're going to say, okay, if we want to say that X is objectively wrong in reality, because that's the way reality is, then X is objectively wrong because that's the way reality is. Now we need an argumentation for that and or a demonstration of that, but we're going to pretend for the moment that we had said argument and or demonstration of that and say, okay, we've discovered that X is truly, really wrong, and there you go. We're done. It doesn't get to God. Period. Because it just identified how reality works. Gravity exists. Therefore God. That's about as good as this argument has gotten so far.
It's like grass is green. Well, when I say grass is green, that statement is true if the grass actually is green. Not because I see it or I believe it or anything like that, or because we've defined it as a culture that way.
Okay, and once again, this is reinforcing the idea. If it is this way, this is the way it is. It's a fact of reality. We don't need to posit God. So how are we going to get to God from here?
Now, whether or not there are objective morals, that's a different debate. But this question is presuming there's objective morality.
Whoa! Whoa, 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 whoa. Give me that debate, because before I can grant this, I need to not be skeptical of this as an idea. Alright, okay. I'll tentatively grant it for the purpose of this analysis.
Okay, so let me give an illustration to step into this. How do you know a good bowler from a bad bowler? How do you know a good bowler from a bad bowler? So here we have our terms good and bad. Notice we're not using them in a moral sense, but we're using them as a way of measuring something, okay? The way you know a good bowler from a bad bowler is a score. That is, there has to be a system of scorekeeping for you to make sense of whether a bowler is doing a good job or a bad job, and that's true in all sports, okay? Now, what this teaches us is the words good and bad, however they happen to be used, are words that depend on some scoring system.
Okay, the analogy is kind of weak, and I certainly hope you don't go, oh, well, we need a scorekeeper then, so therefore God. But it's kind of a weak analogy. But all right, we'll go with it. We'll roll with it. I know that there's problems. Yeah, I know logical fallacy counter. Don't be so hasty, okay? We don't know if it's a false analogy yet. All right.
Lewis said a good portrait is good by comparing it to the original. So you make a portrait of Mr. Kokel. Is that a good one or not? Let's look at his face and see if the portrait matches up.
Okay, C.S. Lewis is talking about art, which is very subjective. And I don't know why you would appeal to C.S. Lewis, because I don't care what he said. He's just an author. But, come on, bring it back home here.
So whenever you have the words good or bad, you have to have some kind of standard to measure the good or bad of this other thing. Now, we are talking about good and bad morally, all right? We are talking about how certain actions or behaviors or thoughts or whatever happen to be good or bad in themselves. Well, how do you know when anything is good or bad? You have to have a scoring system. If somebody has broken the rules, there has to be a set of rules to be broken. So whenever you say that something is objectively good or bad, you are implicitly indicating that they have either conformed to a set of rules, good score, or they have broken something in those rules, bad score. This is what makes our language about morality coherent, that we have some understanding of what good and bad means attached to a reference point.
Okay, you've made this point already, so connect this with God, for the love of humanity.
Okay, so here's the question, and here's where I'm going to cash this out. Given that we are talking about transcendent objective morality, not just personal opinions, but transcendent morality, in order to say that something is transcendently right or wrong, good or bad, you must have a transcendent scoring system.
Alright, so all of the possible fallacies are now actual fallacies, because the analogy shifted and turned into something that it didn't need to do, which I guess is what his intention was from the beginning. But he's now positing a scorekeeper for the scoring system. But that sort of misses the entire point. Let's just say that I had a device, I'm going to call it a moral detector, and this device is able to scan the universe and detect that morals are things in the universe. And it goes beep, 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 and I'm like, alright, that means that murder is objectively wrong. That's a fact of reality. Wow, that's pretty awesome. Okay. Why? I don't know. That's just the way reality is. And we don't know anything more, but we do know that it's that way. Okay. That's it. We don't need something that made that so. It's just the way it is.
If you don't have a transcendent scoring system, then it makes no sense to say something is good or bad. All you're doing is just reporting personal autobiography.
Okay, so this is now shifted to an appeal to consequence. Okay. And? So what? If that's the way it really is, for real, then that's the way it really is for real. If these words only have meaning because humans have given them meaning, then that's it. And who's to say that the scorekeeper or score maker can't be the very humans themselves?
The key question then is, where did the scoring system come from?
Which begs the question, because we're assuming that there's a score system. Again, if we were able to somehow detect that X was wrong, and that was the nature of reality, that's as far as that would take us. It wouldn't mean that it needs something to make it that way. It would just be that's the way it is. Water has 2 parts hydrogen and 1 part oxygen. Well, why? That's the way water is. There isn't a why. It just is. That's the tautology of it. So if X is wrong, then X is wrong, and that's just simply the tautology. That's just simply a reflection of the way that reality is, and we never have to posit a water maker or a score maker to find that this is true. But we still need to find that it is true.
Now, in this case, evolution is not going to help you, and it's the place that most people jump to. Oh, evolution can give us that because morality has a survival benefit, but that's not going to work here. And the reason is all evolution can do is make you believe something. If it can do that, even. It can make you believe that rape is wrong. It can't make a rape wrong in the objective sense. Just like it can't make kindness a virtue. It might trick us into believing kindness is a virtue so we can get our genes into the next generation, but it can't make kindness virtuous.
Wow, I actually agree with this guy for a change here. But evolution is the explanation of why there are morals at all. And, of course, you could go further and say that morals requires ethics, but that's a little bit more complex of thinking. But nonetheless, we wouldn't have gotten to the point that we are at unless we developed these systems. But he's right. It cannot tell us that these things are right in the way that he is trying to say that they are right and or wrong. We'd need some other testing mechanism. We would need some other way to identify it other than evolution. So what scientific thing do we have that can test if this is really right and really wrong? Where is my moral detector machine?
Something else does that. If kindness is a virtue, if rape is wrong, and a whole host of other rights and wrongs, there's got to be a system that is above everything that's not dependent on evolution. Evolution can only give you subjectivistic, relativistic morality. That's it. But if we're talking about objective morality, there's got to be an objective system of scoring.
And I think, again, this scoring thing is really a weak analogy. If there is this objective morality in the way that you're framing it, then it would be a fact of reality. But it still wouldn't need a score maker to make it so, without begging the question.
But I think what we can do is, given the fact of objective morality, if it is a fact, and it seems to me it is, because the problem of evil is a fact, and you can only have a problem of evil with objective morality.
The positing of the problem of evil can be done so without saying the word good and evil, which are constructs of our brains, whether he wants to accept that or not. They are constructs of our brains. But it's not really good, it's not really bad. Okay, privation, starvation, disease, famine, sickness, dying, whatever. Okay, these things, what do we want to call them if not bad? Unbeneficial? Fine, they're unbeneficial. Because they don't benefit those people, and they don't benefit society. If we don't care that they're sick, and that sickness spreads, then society dies off because we did nothing about it. Alright? If we don't care that they're hungry, and then we find ourselves hungry, and they have plenty of food, they're not going to help us because we didn't help them. You know, so that's still an issue. And that's still an issue for the posit of a deity that has abundant supply of power that can do anything, at least anything logically coherent, I would assume, and yet doesn't do anything for these people. Well, okay, fine. Maybe it doesn't care about these people, but we're told by you guys, at least for the Christian version of God, that it does care about us. Okay, so if a parent, since we're drawing analogies, let me draw one. If a parent doesn't feed their kid, we take that kid away and we find somebody that will feed them. Because that parent is not doing their job. They're not being a very good parent. Okay, they're not doing the things that we would expect a parent to do. Maybe they love that kid, but they're certainly not showing that they love that kid. Maybe they have a really good reason. I was just really busy at work. How can I feed my kid if I'm not doing my job? Well, yes, but you need to do this job as well because both are your jobs. Well, I'm limited. Okay, well, maybe we understand because you're limited, and you need more help. So let's get you somebody to help you. And if you continue doing it, then we really do need to take this kid away and find somebody that can care for this kid correctly. Because you're not doing it. And your excuses don't matter. So, the deity that you posit recognizes, I would assume, all these starving people in Africa and in America and Japan and everywhere else in the world that there's starving people. And does nothing about it. Not a thing. Doesn't do anything. It could rain manna down. Did that in the past. Could rain manna down so people would have food. No matter where they were in the world, manna would come, they would have food. Now, I don't know about water, but maybe we could also supply some clean water as well. In fact, water is far more important, and water, too, is in scarce supply in a pure form that would not hurt people, and that too would have to be supplied. So it could rain bottles of water in a certain location so people could pick them up and have, you know, pure water to drink. Your deity could do these things and doesn't. This is not being loving in the way that we recognize loving because it's not doing the things that it should be doing. That's a problem that there is no explanation for. There's nothing but excuses offered. Well, if it did that, then free will would be hurt somehow. Or maybe it's doing it for a really, really good reason. 'Cause something will happen that's really good later. So, the ends justify the means, but only for God. Without those sort of excuses, which is all they are, what defense do you have? None. Other than to go, well, but you can't recognize that this thing is evil if there isn't really a thing as evil. It's not beneficial. If you want me to change the word, I'll change the word. Fine. It's not very helpful for that individual or for society. And we have to decide what sort of society we want to be in the end. Do we want to be the society that doesn't take care of people? And we are, by and large, that sort of society. We're not taking care of the problem. We're not really addressing it in a way that fixes the problem and or prevents the problem from even being a problem in the first place. Not even some of the more advanced societies, as I see them, like Japan, can do this yet. So we, as a civilization of globally, haven't really come up with a decent solution. And your deity that knows what that solution would be isn't telling us what that solution is. So it's not even not doing anything about it. It's not even telling us what to do about it. That is not a loving deity or a deity that has any power to help us at all. It is a deity identical with nature, and thus we never need to posit it ever. That's the true problem of evil, as you put it. It shows that your deity either lacks the power or lacks the compassion that you're positing for it, or both. So your posit is wrong. That's the argument. You've changed what that argument is, and you've tried to manipulate it to favor your side when it cannot favor your side. One last thing, and then I'll have a conclusion, and we'll be done.
Then given the fact of objective morality, then we have to find some way of grounding it, making sense of it. That has to be a scoring system of some sort. It's got to be a transcendent scoring system. And the nature of morality is obligation. We have an obligation to someone to obey the system, someone who's an appropriate authority. That's the moral argument. And I think it's a good one. Because the alternative is there is no authority, which means there is no scoring system, which means there is no morality, which means there is no problem of evil, not objective evil. There are just people who are annoyed at things they don't like. But why should anyone care if there is no moral obligation to even care about those things? So that's how the moral argument works.
So we have two more appeals to consequence as well as a loaded question. Oh, if things aren't this way, then they're this way, and that's really bad, and we don't like that, so we're going to say that it's not really that way. And, by the way, did I also mention that if things aren't this way, then it's really bad, and I don't like that, so things can't be that way. Oh, and here's a loaded question. Why do we act like it's really this way if nothing really matters? And it's just framed in a way that you cannot answer the question without pre-assuming the assertments made in the question. So, no to that as well. 9 logical fallacies. So, even if we had the argument that morals were objective, we still do not have the argument to demonstrate that because they are objective, therefore God must exist. So, even if we had that, we still would have to be skeptical of his ideas here that say this is how this argument works. This is how this shows that God is real. No, it doesn't. And even if it did somehow not have any logical fallacies, maybe if he avoided the "get off my screen, you're not white, stop looking at me like that, you're not even white, okay, you wouldn't be white, go away." Alright, where was I? Right, so even if this was all logically valid from start to finish, we still wouldn't even be close to his concept of a deity. We'd have something that is required, and we couldn't really say anything more. Well, but there's morals in the universe, and we somehow are pretending like we have both arguments for this. Okay, and therefore it has to be some sort of mind, and there's another argument for that. Then what? Then we need more arguments to tell us what that sort of mind is. I don't even know what sort of arguments you could construct to get from there to where you want to go, which is a particular type of deity with particular attributes. Just because there's morals doesn't mean that there's morals in the thing that made those morals. Maybe the morals are a consequence of how it made reality if we found those things in reality, which we haven't done yet. And of course, this is all assuming we actually did all of that work. Wow. That's a lot of assumptions, a lot of granting of things that we haven't even seen yet, and a lot of if only this wasn't logically valid statements to get to that end. And then we still have a huge amount of work cut out for us. Of course, maybe you're like William Lane Craig and just go, oh, that's okay, the argument's not meant to get to a specific thing. And you'll just ignore that point. Okay. So you might be wondering, Deconverted Man, what's your position? You're a skeptic. Are morals objective or are they subjective? My answer is yes. And you're like, what? You can't say yes, I can. They're both and neither at the same time. And you would say, well, what? Well, if humans make them, and as best as I can determine, humans have made them over time, they are objective for those humans at that time for the society. And they are subjective to every individual in that society, unless that society is making those things punishable or making those things something that they must do or they're expelled from said society. Unless there's an enforcement of those objective rules that they have created, then they're subjective. So if we look at killing, if you kill someone accidentally, there's still penalties for that action. If you do it deliberately, the penalties are increased. If you did it accidentally, you weren't even aware that you did it, and no one finds out that you did it, and nobody knows, just someone's dead, the consequence is somebody's dead, it's your fault, but no one knows that. That's a shame. Somebody somewhere is going to miss that person more than likely, but nonetheless, society won't be able to do anything about it because society doesn't know anything about it. That action mattered for that person because that person doesn't get to continue to enjoy existence. So, if we had cameras everywhere and could see all things happening all the time, we would see that you had accidentally killed that person, and you could then be assigned the consequences of doing that. That wouldn't restore the person to life, but it would still be some sort of justice that we could have. And wouldn't we then be obliged to do something about the action that had taken place? So what good does it to posit a idea of something that sees everything that's going on, knows about the wrongs, but is not doing anything about the wrongs? Maybe it does exist, as I said. Maybe it really is there. But it doesn't change anything. The wrong has still been done. The consequence is still there. And when society, if we place society in this idea where society itself would know that this had happened, society would act on this, yet this thing that you're positing will not act on this? What does that say about the thing that you're positing? Why is it not doing something when we would? Come to your own conclusion about that. We don't have a logically coherent argument in this, and we had to tentatively grant that there was already a logically coherent argument given, which hadn't been given. I'm going to take that tentatively away and issue a formal fallacy, failure to give an argumentation, for that problem as well. So that is in addition to all 9 of the logical fallacies that we already have. Unless and until we have a logically coherent argument, we have to continue to be skeptical of the conclusions.